Hello and welcome to Renovation Uncovered, a series of podcasts from Renovation Underwriting. Think of us as your renovation survival guide. My name's Daniel Fox, and in these episodes we'll journey through your property renovation from concept to completion. This time, why it's good to be a control freak.
We all want to be control freaks. The biggest thing for me is it's your money, it's your asset, it's your biggest financial investment. And when you're looking at protecting that, you need to make sure that you're going into it with your eyes wide open.
This episode is called Do You Know What You Need to Know and Why It's Good to Be a Control Freak. My first question to Lynn Toynton, Senior Underwriter at Renovation Underwriting, was simple. Who should be in control of a project?
Well, I think this is pretty obvious, isn't it? It's the client, it's the client's money, so they should be the one that ultimately takes control of what's going on. They need to be protecting their main asset and their investment. But having said that, you don't want the client to be constantly breathing down the project professional's necks. Everybody's got a role to play. So the client should be taking advice from the right professionals. They should be taking advice from the architect, the structural engineer, the contractor. They know what they're doing, hopefully, and how to do it. And they should also be talking to people like a solicitor, potentially from a legal perspective, an insurance broker from the insurance perspective. But ultimately, the client is the one that needs to be in control of, as a minimum, the high level management of the project.
Okay, it's my project, my house, I'm in control. But what control do I actually have? Remember, I'm just a podcaster. I'm not a builder. This isn't my world. So how do I keep control?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? So speaking to people whose projects have already gone wrong and seeing what goes on with them, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, not knowing what they can do, it all boils down to being powerless and feeling like they've got no control over the situation. So the best thing they can do is to get that advice up front. Make sure that they're in the know. If you know what's going on, you're already 90% of the way there. And sometimes if it is going really badly wrong, it's knowing that it's time to cut your losses and lose quickly rather than keep throwing money down that big rabbit hole. And that gives you better control over resolving a situation. But there are some proactive things they can do ahead of time. Get your advice, get all your ducks in a row, get your project plan together. But then the most important thing you can do is make sure you've got your contract. So a joint contract, whether that might be a JCT, which is a standard form of contract.
So you might remember this from a previous episode, but JCT stands for Joint Contracts Tribunal. It's a standard set of contracts used by the building industry to help deliver your project.
Or some of the other forms of contract that are out there as well, they actually help the client to lay out with the contractor and agree who's responsible for what. And when things go wrong, what's the resolution? So that will set out things like costings and what happens if costs overrun. What happens if the client decides to change the design or the execution or the materials that they're going to use? What happens if they fall out with the contractor and how are they going to resolve that? What happens if there's an unforeseen delay which causes a problem, and how do they deal with things like overrunning, penalties, and those kind of things. So there's a lot that you can do with a contract, and that's got to be your first port of call, which means it's always really important to get the right advice. Now, annoyingly, in the building industry as a general rule, the contracts for building works tend to be administered by the architect. But architects are advisors from a design point of view. They don't necessarily have the legal background to be able to advise on a contractual perspective. They can talk about what happens in the standard general industry, and they usually end up ticking the same boxes because they know that they're safe boxes to tick. But ultimately, if you need any variations, you do sometimes need to speak to somebody who's a specialist in that area, and that might need bringing in a solicitor. Similarly, you can talk to your insurance broker. Brokers know a lot about building works nowadays because they deal with these building works projects. They have to come to Renovation Underwriting to get the cover. But brokers can only advise from an insurance perspective. They can't give legal advice either. So it's really important to understand which professional has the right level of knowledge and experience for the matter in hand. So there's just the same as there's no point asking a builder to help you with your investments. There's no point asking a solicitor to tell you what bricks to use. You need to make sure you're talking to the right professional about the right thing. And that in itself gives you a lot of control. Another thing that comes out of your contract is that you also have protection against things like defective workmanship. So what if the builder's built something and it's not up to scratch, or they've used materials that aren't up to scratch? Well, the contract again will lay out what the rectification will be on that. And that could be that you might notice it straight away, in which case they might have to undo it and rebuild it there and then. But also usually the contracts will build in a period after the work has finished, where if any of these things rear their ugly heads at a later date, you've still got some recourse to go back to them to get it fixed.
Rights of recourse sounds really technical, but let me break it down for you. It typically means the legal right of an insurance company to recover costs or damages from a third party who caused an insured loss.
So it's really important that you do pay attention to those things, because that then will tell you whether or not you've even got any rights of recourse and how that will get put right.
So I need to stay in control. But how much influence do I actually have over how this project plays out? Can I really make a difference?
That's quite a big loaded question, because a lot of people feel like being in control means that they are micromanaging everything. Now, most people, A, don't have the time, B, don't have the experience, or C, have the inclination to micromanage. And actually, even if they did, it's not very helpful to the contractor or to anyone else to have somebody constantly breathing down your neck. You don't need that as a contractor. You need to be able to be trusted to get on and do the job that you've been hired to do, just the same as all your other professionals. You hire them to do a job, they do it, they present it back to you. But as an interested party, it's your money, you're writing the checks. So it's not unreasonable for you to be kept informed of any major issues or any major changes, any potential challenges. And you should be able to have those open conversations where you talk about potential challenges before they've happened, or in the very early stages of them happening, so you can make an informed decision about what to do next. So because it's your money, you do have some control. If you find, for example, that one element of your build is going to cost way more than anticipated, you need to be able to have an open conversation with your contractor to say, okay, do we need to look somewhere else in the project to shave some money off, or do we need to alter the design to make it more cost effective? Or are you going to push ahead anyway? A lot of contractors, particularly if they've committed to a fixed price, will want to keep all of that to themselves because they'll want to be seen to be managing it effectively. But ultimately, it might cause you problems down the line. If the only way they're going to be able to stay on budget is to cut corners, then you might not get the quality of finish, or indeed actually even a safe working environment for the staff. So it's really important that you know about it. If you know, you can decide together. So that's probably the first thing. There is another part of it as well about staying in control, which is also understanding the wider legal implications that you have as a property owner. So not only do you have a responsibility to yourself to make sure that your project's delivered properly and on time and on budget and all of those things, but you also have responsibilities to other people, your neighbours, for example. Think about things like working times. Think about things like Party Wall Act, if you're doing work near a boundary wall and it could affect their property. And you need to make sure that any notices to your neighbours have gone out, and if they have any disputes or any issues, you need to follow that through and make sure you comply with that. You also need to make sure that you've got adequate insurance in place to comply with your mortgage, for example, because your lenders will also have requirements. So all of these things are things that are within your control, and you just need to make sure that you're on top of it. Now, nobody is able to keep on top of it all without at least having somebody give them a bit of guidance. So you don't have to share that burden all on your own, but what you do need to do is you need to get advice, talk to people, and make sure that the key, most important elements are things that are being taken care of. And that is absolutely within their control.
So just say I'm not happy with the end results. How long do I have after my project is completed to raise concerns with the contractor?
Most building contracts, if you have a written contract, will have some sort of defects period in there. It's normally called a defects period, in fact. And for very small projects, that defects period might be as little as a month or 3 months. A medium-sized project, you can see contractors proposing contracts of where they say it's a 6-month protection period, and some might say 12, 18. It's uncommon to see any for more than 18 months. You might see on very big projects up to a couple of years. But what you need to be conscious of is if you've signed it, then you've agreed it. So if you're looking at a project and you're getting, for example, an extension built, if a contractor agreed a defects period of 3 months, I would say that's probably a bit cheeky on their behalf. And that's why you need to just keep an eye on it and make sure you're talking to the relevant professionals and just make sure that you understand A, what you're signing, and B, that it's giving you the right protection.
So going into my renovation project, it's clear I'm going to have a lot of decisions to make along the way. But what are some of the most challenging ones that I should expect?
Okay, so the big decisions normally involve one of the key concerns that you'll have as a client. So that could be a budgetary concern. Remember, you're writing the checks, so anything that involves money, you should really be involved in that decision. Same goes for quality and design choices. If it's your house, you're going to have to live with it. So if you don't want a garish green wall, you're going to have to speak up and say so. But similarly, if it is within a certain amount of flex, you might decide that actually you're happy with the people on site making ad hoc decisions on your behalf, but you need to set a threshold or a parameter under which they can make those decisions and make it clear at what point they should be referring to you to make decisions as well. So that's the big thing, is how much is it going to cost? Is it going to add extra time? Is it going to seriously affect the quality of the build? Or is it a design choice which I'm going to have to live with? They're the main choices that the clients have to face. But tracking that a little bit further comes where they have to potentially make a deviation because a challenge has arisen. It might be, for example, that they've started to dig a hole for building foundations and they've struck clay, or they've struck a problem in the ground, which means they're going to have to rethink the design, and then the design has to go back through planning, for example, or go back to their neighbours for their neighbours to reapprove. So all of these things have an impact on the client, and the client should be on top of these things. And again, keep communicating with your insurance broker. Keep referring back to your contract. See if your contract needs to be amended to have addendums or additions onto it to account for these deviations, or if you're happy with it. And also make sure, of course, that you refer to your insurance policy to make sure your cover matches what you've decided to do, because if you've changed something, then you need to let your insurers know as well.
The key thing here is don't be afraid to talk to your advisory team.
Your broker is always there for you. They will be able to give you that advice at any point during the project in terms of the insurance. But if you are changing your amount you're spending on your building works, you need to tell your broker. If you're changing the contractor you're going to use, you need to tell the broker. If you're changing the design significantly to the point where the structural element of the work has changed significantly, you need to tell your broker. Similarly, if the project's going to take a lot longer, guess what? Tell your broker. But the same goes for your legal advice team. Generally speaking, if you've drawn up a good contract in the first place, you won't have to keep going back to your solicitor to say, oh, we need to just agree this addendum, we need to do that amendment, because it'll all be taken care of within the contract. But some contracts do have a provision that say you need to agree a special extension, for example, if you've agreed a certain period of time and a contingency and the project massively overruns, either because of you or because of something else, you might then agree to grant your contractor an extension of the contract period to waive the penalties for overrunning, for example. So things like that, you might need to just check back in with your solicitor. If you have a dispute over a party wall from a neighbour, you definitely need to tell your insurance broker, as well as the solicitor potentially as well, if you think it's going to turn into a legal dispute. So all of these things need to just be referred and spoken about. Now, I'm aware your broker normally won't charge you for their time. A solicitor will. And quite often, project professionals as well, architects and structural engineers, generally speaking, will agree a price for the project design, but if you require them to come back and reconsult throughout the period, they might charge extra as well. So you do need to be careful about that. But again, if you're aware of that at the beginning of the project, you can agree terms with them to say, at what point can I come back to you? When can I reconsult with you for free? When can I reconsult with you at an agreed rate? So if you've got all that up front, it makes it a lot easier when things crop up that you know exactly what you're getting into before you pick up the phone.
It's starting to feel like I need to be a bit of a control freak. Should I worry about that?
We all want to be control freaks. The biggest thing for me, and obviously I'm talking about insurance because that's what we do, but the biggest thing for me is that, as I said all along, it's your money, it's your asset, it's your biggest financial investment potentially of your lifetime, particularly for a private homeowner, it generally is. And when you're looking at protecting that investment, you need to make sure that you're going into it with your eyes wide open. You don't want to find some little loophole that's going to mean you're going to lose all your money. Nobody wants that. But similarly, we talk about insurance. We haven't really gone into this, ironically, considering this is an insurance podcast. But actually, why would you not want to make sure your insurance is arranged by you? Because if you rely on someone else to do it, there's always going to be that niggling doubt about whether they've done it right. And we often joke about it. And I love the building industry dearly, but builders are builders because that is their skill set. Solicitors give legal advice because that is their skill set. And just the same as you wouldn't ask a builder to advise you on a legal contract, and you wouldn't ask your solicitor to advise you on what bricks to use, you shouldn't be asking your builder to advise on insurance because it's not their skill set. So that's why we always come back to, yes, be a control freak. You don't have to do everything yourself. What you need to do is make sure you're informed, and that means talking to the right professional about the right thing at the right time. So make sure you speak to your broker regularly. They will give you the insurance advice. Make sure you speak to your solicitor, your architect, your contractor. They will give you the advice about their specialist subject.
Lynn Toynton wrapping up this episode of Renovation Uncovered on why it's good to be a control freak. Next time, what your contractor isn't telling you about insurance.
What they've actually got may not transfer well or track well into the projects they're actually doing. And they tend to embark on an insurance conversation once a year and then assume from there on in they're covered whatever they're doing. And of course we know that's not the case.
Catch you next time.